Tanaka Atsuko, Fashion, Art, and Gender. The year is 1952. The United States occupation of Japan has finally pulled out, leaving behind a nation that has now experienced a rapid series of changes that affect the political and social climate in ways far different to what they were accustomed to. As Namiko Kunimoto states in Tanaka Atsuko's Electric Dress and the Circuits of Subjectivity, these changes included a marked growth in population density created by transportation upgrades, a sudden increase in the commercialization of women's bodies in the media, unprecedented industrial development, and a surge of productivity in the arts. The average amount of private living space per person in the city dramatically decreased. What effects would this unsettled environment have on one's sense of self? While the United States had withdrawn from Japan, their influence still remained. The right to vote was given to women in 1946, as well as more opportunities within the job market, encouraging many young girls to take up work within the industrial world. Women's rights movements, while certainly not a new concept brought in by the West, were made more open and noticeable by this time frame. There were, however, contrasting influences as well. Magazines and billboards advertising Marilyn Monroe as the new "it girl", newspapers and how-to books describing how to modify the traditional kimono and yukata garments to be more westernized, and makeup and cosmetics demonstrating how to make one's eyes larger and skin brighter became the new norm of the commercial and advertising world. Fashion, in both the sense of individual style and commercialized clothing, became more akin to that seen on the silver screen, mimicking the models of the West with their casual clothes that hugged the figure, showed off their legs, and emphasized their feminine sexuality. This new modern woman was at once admonished for her perceived corrupt morals, seen as a threat to the traditional conservative views, and yet we can see how she was idolized in the many ways she was plastered across signage and papers, a goddess of duality, a demon of change. It is within this world of fashion, of garments and clothing and magazine beauties, that Tanaka Atsuko begins to forge her criticisms. Yet it is also from a vastly different source of inspiration that she pulled her art into form. The rising technological industries that printed this modern woman and displayed her under neon lights would also play a role in Tanaka's criticism, inspiration, and unconventional medium. As Tokyo and Kyoto, the contemporary and historical capitals of Japan, had historically been the hub for artistic culture, it would be a surprise to see someone from Osaka, more well known for its industry, to emerge as a prolific artist of the time. Inspired by the very industry she had grown up amongst, with the flashing neon billboards, speeding cars, and increasing usage of trains, Tanaka Atsuko brought her experience and vision with her to the short-lived Zio Kai art group, and then later into the more renowned Gyutai group. While being opposed to the idea of being called a feminist or having her work associated with feminism at the time, seeing as she viewed it as an issue different from the role gender played in her political, personal, and creative experiences, nevertheless, her experiences and works would be crucial in criticizing Japanese attitudes towards gender at the time. While not the first to do so, it is the way in which she creates her works that signify this criticism. Utilizing a myriad of mediums, including vinyl paints, installations, and performance pieces, Tanaka weaves together a blend of the body, both feminine and masculine, and its relationship to the ever-growing industry and commodification around it. The most poignant piece of which being her work, Electric Dress, utilizing a combination of garment making, installation, and performance. Electric Dress consisted of a dress-like form constructed of heavy and hot lamps suspended from the ceiling, in which Tanaka herself would wear, shielding her form within a shapeless and jagged mass. only her face would be seen clearly while within the outfit. The walls surrounding her would be covered in mock ups and concepts of the project, and the dress itself would flicker with light, gradually heating and warming both the wearer and the viewers of the piece, growing in discomfort for all involved. The piece would be displayed differently across the years, sometimes with Tanaka wearing the garment, and other times with her fellow male Gyutai colleagues. The change in who wore the dress, from woman to man, draws into question whether the dress itself could even be considered feminine or masculine in the first place, and whether that mattered. Was the dress meant to signify the growing discomfort, a similar discomfort as the lamps flickering and heating and weighing across the shoulders of the wearer, of the presentation of the female form within the media and growing culture of Japan? We can see that the shapelessness created by the dress on the body stripped away the human form of whoever wore it, leaving only their face as a symbol of their humanity, not too dissimilar to how the feminine identity was stripped of its original traditional identity, demonized and yet also sexualized by the culture and media. The identity of the feminine was not a person, but a thing to be advertised, sold as a commodity, a template for how to's, but never a person. Conversely, when only the face of the wearer is seen, perhaps the only thing that matters, clothing or media or otherwise, is the person themselves. How they perceive their own identity is, and should be, the only thing that matters. We can see that while the art piece is titled Electric Dress, it was not just Tanaka who wore it. It was also worn by other members of the Gyutai group in separate exhibitions, the majority of them being male, signifying that perhaps, while the identity of the individual wearing the garment is being perceived through a traditional lens, that being of a dress should be worn by a woman, it is not the perception that creates the individual's identity, as the wearers could very easily be a man or a woman. The body turned shapeless and incandescent, stripped of any identifying features of the wearer save for their face, the electric dress in this form demonstrates that the individual is to be perceived and admired for their individual selves, outside of any prerequisite classifications of gender or its connotations. Eventually, the garment itself would be dismantled, and Tanaka would incorporate the separate pieces of lamps and wires into their own individual works of art, which then begged the question of whether the art piece was now considered finished, being that it no longer held the same shape or purpose as its original form, or if it had simply evolved into the next step that it would or should take. Would it be possible that the evolution could be considered a part of the original art piece, or should there be a defining line separating the two? In the end, does that truly matter, as the art piece is still its own piece, its own self, as it were, reflecting its previous iteration of a piece that should not be influenced by preconceived notions of gender? Perhaps, too, the new form of this art piece is not to be influenced either? It is, as it always has been, an individual. Tanaka Atsuko is stated to have been hesitant to identify her works as feminist, preferring instead to be seen as just an artist creating art, rather than specifically a woman artist. This was common for the time frame amongst many other women artists. As stated by Kunimoto, fashion for Tanaka was more than a consumerist trend. It was for her a verb, to fabricate, adjust, configure. Rather than seeking out fashionability, Tanaka instead exposed how it had become both cage and armor for the female form. And what better way to portray something both beautiful and protective as an armored cage than a shapeless mass of flashing lights and heated bulbs, where there is no individual, and yet an individual is all we can truly see. Thank you for listening to this presentation on the question, in what way does Tanaka Atsuko's artwork criticize Japanese attitudes to gender? Works cited include Tanaka Atsuko's Electric Dress and the Circuits of Subjectivity by Namiko Kunimoto, and Situating a Singular Kind of Action, Early Gyutai Painting, 1954 through 1957, by Joanne Key, featuring quotes from Tanaka Atsuko's Electric Dress and the Circuits of Subjectivity by Namiko Kunimoto. Special thanks to Professor Raymond Spiteri for allowing me to record this presentation, and to my flatmates for putting up with my rambling. Special hate to Mothball the cat, who stepped on my keyboard and deleted half my recording files.